If I wanted to find out whether a man was a Christian, I would go and ask his wife. If a man doesn't treat his wife right, I don't want to hear him talk about Christianity. D.L. Moody, American evangelist and publisher. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Apologies for the lack of audio at the very beginning there. There's just some buttons that have to be hit. And if they don't get hit, well, then there's no sound. But I appreciate people in the comments letting me know. Every so often, a video of a parent spanking their child makes the viral rounds. What can always be counted on are scores of pompous criticism about child abuse, lack of parenting skills of the parents in the video, juxtapose their own moral preening. The video runs its course, conversation dies down, and the same parents who spank continue to spank their kids. If those kids could speak, they might say, "Thanks for nothing, holier than thou parents." Today, I am going to discuss spanking, which, we might find out that it was against my better judgment. I don't know. Some of you parents out there, pretty judgmental. And look, I know that like everybody right now is talking about all the things that Trump is doing, and that's great, and we should be. However, Friday is my dad talk day. So either one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to have a dad on the show to discuss, whatever he wants to talk about. Or when I don't have one, I'm going to talk about something that's on my mind related to being a dad. Not necessarily parenting advice per se, but something related to being a dad. So today, I'm going to talk about something that's been on my mind for quite some time now. There was a video that went around a while. It was, we'll talk about it here in detail. But and I don't have the video. I'm not going to play it. It was a video. I've seen it more than once actually. It's like two kids are sitting on a chair. It almost looks like they're in a store or maybe like a DMV or something like that. And there's like a parent or a person who appears to be maybe their grandpa. And he's like spanking one of the little boys, like, multiple just swat, 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 swat. And then like I think he points his finger at the girl, maybe gives her a single swat. I can't remember exactly how it played out, but it was something along that line. If I'm describing it and you've seen it, you probably recognize the video that I'm talking about. But there's many of them. We see them all the time. And as usual, outrage happens, right? Comments about how, like the people that are opposed to spanking, they flip out and they're like, oh, they want to talk about how their kids are perfectly behaved. They've never been spanked. They want to, go on and on about how it's child abuse. And then on the other side, the pro spanking folks, those are going to be the ones who, will, they'll post some photo of a wild looking person, maybe a young person with like colored hair and, maybe really woke looking or whatever. And they'll post that picture, or they'll post a picture of somebody rioting or some criminal, and they'll be like, "Well, see, this is what happens when you don't spank your kids, like enough or even at all, rah rah." And so you basically get these two sides that are just basically engaging in hyperbole, which is interesting because the whole point is to talk about how we should treat children, and yet here we are at each other's necks, practically ready to strangle each other, saying some of the most mean things to each other while we're talking about how to best raise children. Just saying, like, if there's anything that sounds confusing, hence the quote, right? I want you to think about that quote that I just read a moment ago. I'll read it again. It goes, uh, if I wanted to find out whether a man was a Christian, I would go ask his wife. And the fuller quote is that D.L. Moody is saying is he wouldn't ask his church pastor, his minister, he would ask his wife. And he said, if a man doesn't treat his wife right, I don't want to hear him talk about Christianity. And I've kind of taken this position if you are opposed to spanking, this is specifically to those who oppose spanking. If you're opposed to spanking and you treat other adults poorly, I kind of don't believe you. I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna tell me that you can handle children without being, physically or verbally abusive, but then you're verbally abusive to adults, you shouldn't really be shocked when I look at you in disbelief because, you'll say things like, "Oh, well, use reason." Okay, you first. And I got a story coming up in a little bit. We'll talk about one of my experiences with somebody along that line. But that's the gist of the quote. That's the reason for it is because I'm like, I just watch these two sides go back and forth, and at the end of the day, how many children end up no longer being spanked after all of that conversation, or do we just pat ourselves on the back and say, haha, I showed that person. I showed that woke person. I showed that abuser, right? Like, okay, and great. You got a lot of likes. What about the kid? Hmm? You ever think about them? You ever think about how your words maybe were not so impactful to the kid that you claim to be so concerned about? Right. And so like today, I want to discuss this topic in a way that hopefully improves how people discuss this topic, specifically those who oppose spanking and possibly even consider themselves like a peaceful parent or a gentle parent or any of the other terms that are used. So, first up, where does Liberty Dad stand with spanking? And this is this is where I might get in trouble, right? Because I know how you people are, you people. Should I be saying that? I don't know. But I know how folks can be when you don't take the immediate stance of never ever, it's totally abuse. You just want to label everybody as abusive or whatever. So where do I stand? I'm mostly opposed to spanking, but I don't take it off the table necessarily. I want you to think of it and walk with me through this. I want you to think of it as more of a last resort tool. That's how I see it. More of a last resort, almost an emergency level tool that you might use in the moment, but then you look back later and realize, you know what? I could have totally done that better. Right. Like that's where I see it. Now, I don't generally like to divulge all of my family stuff because I think, your family should have some things that remain relatively private. My own son here, however, has never been spanked in the typical sense where we're talking like repeated swats. We're talking about like, you put them over your knee, kind of like the old school way, and you just like bam, 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 and you spank them repeat. Never once has he had that. Never. But I believe we can count on one hand the number of times that he's had a simple and single swat on the butt. And every one of those times were a response to one of two things, either him hurting somebody else, which is relatively infrequent, and more when he was much, much younger, right? Like he would get mad and throw a toy at you or something like that. Or he was, so he was him hurting or attempting to hurt someone else, or to get his attention as a matter of safety. So, for instance, I would say, like, this didn't particularly happen, but as an example, imagine that I'm cooking and that he comes over. And with my son, the way that we raise him, we basically allow him in virtually any space that we're in. And in many cases, we bring him to that space. So he's with us all the time. Most like, I don't want to say he's with us all the time. He's active. He's allowed to be an active participant almost all the time. I mean, there are times where it's not appropriate, like if I'm working out in the garage and I've got the table saw out. Okay, well, the table saw is off limits to him, right? So he can be out there present, but I don't necessarily allow him to be active on that. When I'm in the kitchen cooking, if he wants to come over and stir the food that I'm cooking, I say, "Okay, well, bring over your stool and you know how to do this." And so we do this. And we've been doing this since he could like literally stand there at the stove. Right? So we bring him into our we take him places. You know, very like there are some events where it's like, hey, it's not really child appropriate if we go to a really nice event where we're dressed up and there's, maybe they don't explicitly say there's no kids allowed, but we know that no kids are going to be there because this is an adult party. You know, we don't take him. But for the most part, he goes with us. He's with us all the time. And so then that means that he is going to be, even if I'm doing adult things, he's going to be present. And in many cases, he's going to be an active participant. So for me, as a matter of safety, I look at it and say, I would rather slap his hand than allow his hand to get burnt. And by allow, I don't mean like watching it happen and say, yeah, it'll be okay, but allow a situation to occur where he is maybe not, like imagine that he's on the stove and he's wanting to touch it. And I go, no, don't touch that. And I pull his hand back. And he goes to touch it again. And I say, no, don't do that. And then he goes to do it again. So then I might smack his hand and say, hey, no, right? Like the point being, I'm allowing him to be in this space, but there are boundaries. And when you start crossing some of these boundaries and put yourself at risk, then yes, I will risk angering the crowds of peaceful parents to ensure that you don't get burnt. Um, and to the surprise of many who are full on pro spanking parents, my child is actually one of the best behaved kids. Now, this isn't just me with rose colored glasses on thinking that my little Johnny is the greatest. Number one, he almost never needs correction of any kind. And we're not talking about like I just don't correct him. Trust me, he gets corrected if he needs it, but he doesn't need it. He does what he's supposed to. He's generally pretty like quiet when he's supposed to be quiet. I mean, for a 5-year-old. Um, he doesn't get into things. If you ask him to not do something, he stops, right? Like when he does need correction, usually a simple, "Hey, stop doing that, please." That's enough. That usually works. And I have not yet met an adult who doesn't go out of their way to tell us how well mannered he is. Please and thank you, again, for a 5-year-old. Very courteous, polite, doesn't stir up trouble. If you ask him to stop doing something, he stops doing it. If you ask him to do something, he usually does it. However, sometimes he's like, I don't want to do that, whatever. Yeah, because he is still 5. But, like I tell people, I say 95% of the time, roughly speaking, he is a great kid. 0 trouble at all. The remaining 5%, when he's maybe not behaving so well, like 4% of the time, he's probably tired and less in control of himself than he would normally be. That's usually what's going on. Then there's this small little sliver, like 1% of the time, where he's not tired and he's just not behaving well. And even then it's not really out of control. Like maybe once, but I can't like I don't like today like I'm thinking about it. I'm like, all right, when was the last time? And I really can't remember even the last time that he was. So it's been quite a while. Now it's funny because when I compare him to myself growing up, I jokingly ponder if he's even really my child because I'm like, man, I was a hellion. Like I was like, if you could say like a child behaved so badly that they sent their parent to an early grave, I would be a candidate. Okay, I was really really rough on my mom, and she was really tough on me. So, but here's the funny thing. Once upon a time, I was full on supportive of spanking. Right? I would have been the one that would have told you maybe say 15 years ago that spanking was necessary. Right? Like not even like, yeah, you probably should keep it on the table. Like, no, I was like, no, it's necessary. Or else your kids are gonna grow up like 15 years ago, I might have been the one to been like, you see this crazy woke person, you want your kid to be like that, you better spank them. Right? Like I would have probably been that person. So what happened? Well, a few things. Number one, I got older. I think there is something to it. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should not have children until you get old. I'm just telling you, as I get older, I have a different perspective of life, and so I think that played a role. Another thing was I shifted my views from conservative to libertarian. Now, libertarian is not really like libertarianism isn't a matter of how you parent your child, right? And it's not even really a it's more of like a framework for people to interact with each other. But that shift led me to observing the world differently. And that was namely that each individual owns their own self and violence against others, absent self defense, was morally wrong. Right. And I don't look at it and say, well, it only applies to an individual who can consent. It also applies to individuals that cannot consent, maybe even explicitly so. So a child cannot consent to much of anything, depending on their age. And so therefore I look at it and say, well, it's really applicable there. Like I could, let's see, there are people in the chat, right? Like, let's say one of them decided they didn't like me and said, DL, I hate you and let's fight. Well, I could agree to that, right? We both could, as adults, agree to that. But if a little kid, if a 6-year-old said, I'm so mad at you, I could punch you in the face. And I go, oh, is that so? Well, let's duke it out and we'll see who wins. Well, that child can't consent in any way, shape, or form, right? Like to actual real violence, right? And so, like, it would be morally wrong because they're at a disadvantage. Another reason, um, because of the prior two, I came to a place where I actually actively don't like violence. Now, I think prior I didn't like violence per se, but I would more tolerate it, right? I would be like, oh yeah, violence is necessary. Sometimes somebody need a ass beaten. And to a degree, I think that is kind of true still. But I don't like violence. Like I actively take a position against violence now. And but I'm not afraid of it and I'm still willing to use it if necessary. But I do go out of my way to avoid any form of it if possible. I keep it again as a very last resort when I have no other option. That's my goal. It doesn't always work out. If you want an example of that, you can go back and look up the episode. I don't remember the number, but the episode where I brought Maj Toure on and I talked with him. This was like a few months ago, where I talked to him and I said, "Hey, man, I almost got in a fight with a dad at a park." And so I told him the story and I said, tell me what I did wrong. Because Maj Toure, if you don't know, he teaches self defense and he teaches de escalation techniques. And so I just walked him through the events and he said, all right, deal. These are all the things that you did wrong. And there was a good, fair list. Right. So it's my goal because I'm a human and humans have emotions and they make mistakes and they do the wrong thing. But actively, I oppose violence. And then the last thing is I had a kid, oddly enough, right? Like I realized that not only do I dislike violence, but I don't I mean, and when I say I realized, like because I had a kid, I can or because I have a kid, I can now understand certain things that I could not understand before having a child. Before having a child, it was easy to say, "Well, yeah, you should spank your kid. Yeah, I'll spank my kid." Right? It was easy to say that. I didn't have one, but now I do. And I've come to this realization, like, I actually don't want to hit my kid ever. Like, think about it. Like, ask and I'm willing to bet that if you ask any parent, even the pro spanking parents, you ask them and say, "Do you want to hit your kid?" I'm willing to bet they say no. Like most people I'm willing to bet say, "No, I don't actually want to." Now they might say, "I have to for this reason," but we'll get to that. But they actively don't. But when I started thinking about it, I was like, I actually don't want to. Like, I really hate the idea of hitting my kid. I hate the idea of anybody hitting my kid. I don't even like yelling at him. Now, I will yell at him a little bit more. Like, I'm a little bit more willing to yell. But again, he's pretty well behaved, so it doesn't happen nearly as often as you might think. But if I am going to do something, yelling is a little bit. That's one of the things that I'm actively working on as a person, just like being a little bit less hot headed. Because when I get hot headed, I'm willing to say some things to people, even big people, right? Like which is pretty much everybody compared to me. But what? But now what? Like, okay, so I don't like any form of violence, and I don't want to smack my kid around, but I still need to raise him, right? Like that still needs to happen. So this led me to searching for, okay, well, how do I raise my kid to be physically, mentally, and emotionally healthy person without spanking or as absolutely little as possible? How do I do that? Well, then I realized it's all about me. I mean, it is. If you think about it, like, because I'm the one doing, I would be the one doing the spanking. So therefore, it's all about me. Like I can't change his behavior necessarily. I mean, that's the goal, is to direct it on a certain path, but I can't change his behavior that that leads me to be angry, right? Like, before it happens. I can do it after the fact. I can say, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about this. You made me upset. I'm really disappointed in you, blah, blah, blah." We can have that conversation after the fact, but I can't change it before the fact. So therefore, I have to change me first. So then I had to think, okay, well, what causes people to spank their kids in the first place? Well, they get angry at a situation. That's what it is. You're mad, or maybe you're worried. Like, your kid runs out in front of a car, and then you get, you have that moment where your heart, you know, drops into your stomach, and then you reach out and you grab them and you shake them and you yell at them. Because you're somewhere between angry and scared, and you're yelling at them, and maybe you smack them on the face or something like that, right? Because you're like, I can't believe you did that. You ran out in front of a car, you know. But there's anger in that situation, right? And so, how do you deal with the anger? Well, I looked at it and I said, well, I guess I have to level set my expectations, because if I level set, then I can be more prepared for when these things happen. I can also find myself being less angry. So here's a good example. I love this example. Drawing on the walls. Now, virtually, because you have to be careful with examples, because not every example applies to every kid, but drawing on the wall is pretty close. Like, like if I traveled across the United States and I just randomly found parents and I said, my 3-year-old was drawing on the walls today, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, kids do that. And they'll probably have a story about how their little Johnny or Susie was drawing on a wall once upon a time, right? So this is a good example, because it really encompasses, like, most every kid out there. And so when I thought about it, I was like, well, if every parent knows that their child has, every parent can tell you a story about their child drawing on the walls, and every parent is going to be like, yep, children draw on the walls. Then drawing on the walls is a relatively normal thing to do. That doesn't mean it's the thing we want them to do, but it is normal. It's not out of the ordinary, right? So if I know that it's coming, then I can mentally prepare and say, all right, one day my kid's gonna draw on the walls. What am I gonna do? Right? What am I gonna do when he does that? Am I gonna get mad and throw a shoe at him and demand that he clean it up? I could do that, or I could respond differently. So how we responded is, we were like, hey, we appreciate you drawing, but you're not supposed to draw on the wall, and now you got to clean it. And so we would make him, like, and I think we have a video of him, like, scrubbing the wall. He has got like a little scrub pad or something. He's cleaning the wall. And once or twice we've actually had him repaint the wall. Now, he has fun doing it initially, right? Because novel things kids like. They're like, oh, I'm painting the wall. Yay, this is so much fun. But it's a way for us to express, like, hey, you don't do this, and then you have to repaint the wall. And then we also did other things, like we would say, hey, no, stop drawing on the wall. Here's a piece of paper. We draw on paper. We don't draw on the walls. Right. And so, but again, we were prepared for it. And so when you're prepared for something to happen, I think it makes it easier for you to be less angry, which makes it easier for you to respond differently. And so I say, the first, foremost, and best thing that you can do is simply level set and say, what is going to happen with my kid? What are they going to do? Like, when my son's 15, or, I'm just picking an age, maybe even earlier, but when he's 15, somewhere around there, there's a good chance that he'll tell me a lie. Because it does, probably earlier. It's gonna happen. Like, it's unlikely that he will make it to 18 and never once lie to me. He's probably already lied to me a time or two, and I don't realize it, you know? Um, but I know it's coming. So now I can think about, how do I want to respond? Right? Because it's going to happen. And every parent out there would be like, yeah, your kid's probably going to lie to you sometime. And there might be a parent that says, "My child never, lied to me," and maybe that's the case. I doubt it. You probably just don't realize it, and maybe your child lied very, very infrequently. So, so I think level setting is the biggest answer. The other one, and this was interesting. I remember reading something out of a book. It said something to the effect of sometimes children act in a way like maybe this is the worst thing that's happened in the world, and you're looking at like they drop their ice cream cone, and it's like the worst thing that's happened to them, and you're like, you just dropped an ice cream cone, just calm down, quit flipping out. But what this book told me, it was like, just keep in mind that if your child's like 4, for example, they and they drop their ice cream, and this is maybe the first time they drop their ice cream, because they're 4, because they've had literally only 4 years of life experience, much of that which they probably don't even remember, that is the worst thing that's happened to them. Like, I'm 46, right? I'll be going on 47 this year. I've got 46 years of way worse than dropping ice cream. So to me, dropping ice cream is kinda like, "Oh, man," right? Like it's annoying, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But if you're 4, that literally may be the worst thing that's actually ever happened to you. You have no other frame of reference, right? Um, if if you get a toy taken away, that may be the worst feeling that you've ever had. And then you explode in anger and you throw other stuff, right? So at the end of the day, I have to remember this child is in a completely different phase from me, one that I don't even remember. I definitely don't remember being 4 or 5 years old. I might have a few spot memories here and there, but I have no really, like, it's not like I can remember high school days. I can remember a lot about my high school days, but I remember virtually nothing about being 5 years old, and I definitely don't remember how I felt about certain things. I can't tell you, "Oh, yeah, the first time a kid took a toy from me." I don't remember that. And so, because I don't remember those things, it's easy to think of the world in terms of my experiences that I do remember and then try to apply them to a child. And this leads to what? Frustration. Leads to anger because you're like, dude, seriously, why are you getting so angry? Why are you acting like this? Well, because they've literally had only 4 years of experience, under which, when you're talking about, like, what they say, small kids, big emotions. When you look at a child like that, like, think of it, they might be 4 years old and have 4 years of life experience, but they really only have, like, 1 or 2 years of actually trying to manage these big emotions and navigate the world around them while they're doing all these things, learning how to talk, learning how to walk, learning how to do everything that they see mom and dad do, right? Learning how to read, tie their shoes, go to the bathroom, like, they are really they are a very actively learning the entire world around them. Everything that I can do that I just think is just super standard, like just going to the bathroom. It's normal. I don't even think about it. I'm not, like I just go. But a little kid, if they're learning to be potty trained, that is like they are an entirely different space. So I have to remember that. It's my job. Give you a good example of that. Um, My son, the other day, he got a newish pair of shoes. They were hand me downs from some mom group that my wife is in, and they're these nice, like, little slip on shoes. And he kind of liked them. He was like, "Oh yeah, I got these cool shoes, and they fit, yada yada." So he was excited. And we have a new dog, so I'm sure you can guess where this is going. So we're sitting there, we're watching TV, and he looks over and he's like, "Honey's chewing on something," and he's like, and I look over, and then all of a sudden we see that it's his shoe, and she chewed up like the tongue of his shoe. All of a sudden, he looked and he just fell into it, just crying and was upset. The dog got in trouble, by the way, but he was crying and upset, and you know why? That was the first time at 5 years old that something bad happened to one of his toys or things, right? Something that he owned. It's the first time. Now, I want you to think about it. If you're 40 years old, I'm 46. If you're 40 years old, if you're 30 years old, or even if you're 25 years old, how many things have you lost to some accident? The dog chewed it up. You lost it. You left something at a store. You left your favorite hat at the store or something like that, whatever, at a restaurant. You know, how many times have you lost something in life? Plenty of times. Right? And so it's an annoyance at this point, but it is something that you've experienced. And because you've experienced it, you are able to deal with it differently than this child was able to deal with something. Because all he saw was, I have no shoes. Right. Like it's not really true. I mean, they're still useful, but from his perspective, it was very different. So I think we have to remember that they are still experiencing the world, and their responses to those experiences will be on the rougher side, right? Because they haven't experienced them, so they don't have the experience of experiencing them in order to properly or best make heads or tails out of the situation. It's just a bad thing that happens, and they've got big emotions that they haven't yet learned to control entirely. And so, bam, something happens. They get mad, they scream and yell, whatever. And so I think if you can do those 2 things, that like level set your own expectations and remember, hey, this little person here, this little guy, this little gal, this is probably the first time they're experiencing that. It's not the 500th like you. It's the first time, right? I mean, when the dog was chewing up something of mine, I was like, "Oh man, really?" I was like, "Come on, honey, stop it." Right? Like my response was way different. I didn't flip out because I've been there. I've experienced it. Right? Also, I was able to level set with the dog, right? I was like, all right, we're getting this new dog. She's a year and a half. I talked to the people. They're like, yeah, she still kind of chews up stuff, so you're gonna want to be careful. Don't leave things out. Okay, got you. I was level. I was prepared for these things to happen. Mentally, emotionally. Like I was prepared. My child could not prepare for those things because he has never experienced it. So this abstract idea of, hey, she might chew up your stuff, put it away, he didn't really understand it until it happened. So remember these things. Remember that you're going to handle these situations way differently than they are. And it's your job as a parent to lead the way and show them and say, "Hey, yeah, this happened. Here's how daddy deals with it or mommy, and this is how you should deal with it." And then, you're going to have to work through them because their big emotions are going to come right out. So you've got to manage their big emotions at the same time that you're saying, "Hey, it's not so bad. It's okay. We'll get around this. We'll get past it and life will be fine." Okay. Let's get to some comments and then we'll do a short intermission. And then we'll come back and I will tell you some of the things that I think like that was kind of like my story, my perspective on spanking. Then after this intermission and comment section, after that, then what we're going to do is we're going to talk into the do's and don'ts when talking to adults because I got some beef with some of y'all. So let's take a look at some of these comments here. Let's see what we got. And by the way, I find it exciting that I don't know if, for anybody that was watching my show last night, um, I can now get the comments up on the screen. So that's pretty exciting because it used to be that I didn't know how to do it and I figured out how now. So let's take a look and see what we've got here for comments. Let's see here. Spank the buttons. Okay. So it's a little cumbersome to do it because I have to click a couple times. Spank Joe Who Knew says spank the buttons. He's talking about the buttons for like and subscribe. Definitely do that. Spank them. Let's see what's else. Uh, did DL just culturally appropriate pacifist parents? Well, um, as it turns out, Joe, I am not a pacifist. I just dislike violence. I think the pacifist will actively not engage in violence whatsoever. I think. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't consider myself to be a pacifist because I'm like, look, at the end of the day, if violence needs to be part of the equation, I'm not afraid of it. So I just do my best to avoid it because I don't like it. Let's see what else. Liberty Dad's thoughts on spanking in schools. Let me get that. Let's see where. Uh, Boom. There we go. Did I get it? Yes. Liberty Dad's thoughts on spanking in schools. Do not touch my child. That's my thought. Do not. If you touch my child, there will be hell to pay. Period. Um, and the reason for that is because I know my child. I know, if it comes down to, hey, this is a moment where spanking is appropriate, I'm going to be the one that knows when that moment is. I'm going to be the one that knows when my child needs maybe reassured. I'm going to be the one that knows the experiences that he's had and hasn't had. Like, I know all these things. At the end of the day, in school, spanking, like, while I get it, right, you're trying to enforce some discipline. I think you're better off reaching out to the parents, and if the parents don't resolve the issue, then removing the student from that school. That's, to me, the best course of action. You shouldn't keep them in there if they're misbehaving and causing the others to not be able to learn. So, reach out to me, and I'll give you a quick story. My mom did that when I was in junior high. She, she was a little on the rough side, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So I did get spanked quite a bit, and she was pretty tough. And she would tell the school, she would say, "Hey, if he acts up, you call me right away." She was a stay-at-home mom, and so, like, the first time they did that, it was like a Friday. I was misbehaving, and I was actually misbehaving. I was being a total ass, and they called up and they said, "Hey, Miss Cummings, your son is, your son Daniel, he's misbehaving." She's like, "I'll be right there." She came and she got me, and then she took me home and locked me in my room and brought me dinner like I was a prisoner. And that's where I stayed the whole weekend. And then it happened one more time, and then I learned to behave in school. Now, you might not like that, but whatever the case, she dealt with it, and I think that she was in the best position to deal with me, much more so than the school. But apparently, she told me that when I was really little, I went to a Catholic school where they actually had nuns in nun garb, and she said they did actually spank you, and she's like kids in general. And she said she would show up and ask the nuns and say, "Was he good today?" And they would pat me on the head and say, "He was just fine." And my mom was like, "I knew you weren't just fine." She was like, "They whooped your ass." So there's that. Let's see what else we got in here. Um, what else we got here? Christians spare the rod, plus other scripture, but it is lighter on details and room for interpretation. Modern world. Keith Garrett says, So here's. I want to be very careful here because I don't identify as a Christian. But I will say, I had a friend one time. He made a very interesting comment about the Old Testament. Um, he said the rules in place were good for a people living in the desert. And so while we may object to spanking today, I think we also have to recognize the world is an entirely different world today than it was, say, 2000 years ago. So I think you could probably make the argument if you go back historically and you say, all right, what was the situation back then? Well, maybe, maybe societies hadn't evolved to the point where talking things out was A, the norm, and then B, they had time for it. Like, people were trying to survive and stuff like that. So they didn't really have a lot of time for these things. We have a lot of time. Like, I actively have the time to deal with my child drawing on the walls. Like, I may not want to use that time. I may want to, go play video games, go outside, go cycling, go hang out with friends. I'll probably want to do any number of other things, but I actually have the time. Like, there's no constant threat of any kind. I don't have to worry about if I don't go out and plow the field, I'm not going to have any food to eat. Right. I think there's a case to be made that 2000 some years ago, the world was a different place and there were rules that were more appropriate for that world. So that's my thought on that. But I would say a more modern interpretation might be, spare the discipline, spoil the child, right? And there are some parents that don't discipline at all. And I mean, like, these are the parents that you see at Walmart, and they're like, "Johnny, that's one. Johnny, that's two. Johnny, that's three." And then they're like, Johnny, what I tell you, Johnny, I'm gonna start counting over again. And it's like, you already counted. Johnny knows that you don't mean it, right? Whatever it is, whether you're gonna take away his PlayStation or whether you're gonna beat him in Walmart, doesn't matter. He knows that he's gonna get away with it for a longer time than he should because you're not disciplining at all. So I think that parents have to develop their strategy ahead of time and then stick with it. Um, and I think that's, and again, I'm not trying to twist scripture to, I'm just trying to say, like, if we're going to look at that and through a modern lens and like, how would that be applicable today? I think that would be a reasonable argument. Okay. Let's see what else. Drawing on the wall. Guess what, kid? You get to clean it up with magic eraser. That Liberty lady says, yep, that's basically what happens. Let's see here. Oh yeah, this is a good one. I like this comment. So let me see if I can't get that up. Um, so that Liberty lady says, or have a designated chalkboard or dry erase board at eye level on the wall. Yeah, see, that's another way that you could. So, like, again, these are strategies that you have to think about, right? You say, okay, well, I don't want you drawing on the wall here, but over here you can draw on the wall, and then you just be like, no, draw over here, and you're okay. No cleaning necessary. You don't get scolded or anything. Draw over here, and you're going to be in trouble, right? And so then you allow them to express their creativity in a confined, directed manner. So I think that's how you accomplish that. All right. So let me unpin that comment there. Okay. So let's see. All right. So I think that's good with the comments for now. So where's my where am I? This the screen is showing me like a couple mouse buttons, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm getting confused there. Apologies. Okay, so let's get back into the let's see, where was I? Oh, yeah. So do me a favor. If you enjoy this show, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. Oh, you know what? I didn't do that right. Here, let me try that again. There it is. See? Look, right there. Subscribe, like, I can't get it. And then bell. All right. And if you want to support the show, I want you to head on over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up for $5. You can be part of the show. There, I will engage supporters of the show, discuss topics that you want me to talk about, maybe response videos that you'd like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only video. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. So if you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes will air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever one works best for dads. Okay, let's take an intermission, then we'll get back and we will discuss how to talk to other people.
What's up, Solutionaries? Maj Toure here, founder of Black Guns Matter and the Solutionary Center. We offer basic firearms classes, conflict resolution, and a whole host of other skill sets that are beneficial to our communities all around America. We're able to do these classes because of your voluntary donations. We don't accept government funds. The people that choose to pay it forward to remove the financial barrier to entry are choosing to do so voluntarily. So you can support at givesingo.com/solutionary. Give it whatever level you can afford to do. Repost the content. Let folks know that we have a community to save and we have to do it ourselves together. givesingo.com/solutionary. Be safe, be solutionary.
All right. So if you don't know who Maj Toure is, check him out. Good guy. He works with the urban community to improve people's safety with firearms and and let them know what the laws are and teach people that, hey, carrying is a good thing. So check him out. Great guy. He's even done some work here in Jacksonville. Okay, so let's get back to the show. Let's talk about a better way to communicate because that's really what this episode is really supposed to be all about. But I did want to lay a little bit of a foundation, letting you know where I am and how I got there and why I believe the way I believe. So, number one, first thing, stop with the studies. Just stop. Like, half of you haven't read them, or you cherry pick information out of them, or when you read them, when I've read them, the results or information in there is questionable as to whether they prove their point. So let me give you an example. I was debating the issue of spanking online with somebody, and they threw out a study. They're like, well, this study proves that spanking your kids, what'd they say? It was like, it proves that spanking your kids harms them, mentally or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay, this will be an interesting study. So I started reading the study, and what I don't remember now, because I had it's been a couple of years. So it might have been two different studies, but it was at least one, possibly two different studies where I read this. When I looked in there and I read like the definitions, like how they were defining spanking, um, it included biting. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Now I haven't interviewed thousands of parents, but I have interacted with many, many parents, probably close to thousands. And I've never really heard of biting as a typical form of punishment, like for everyday things. Normally, or the only time that I've ever heard, not even normally, but the only time I've ever heard about people using biting as a response is when their child bites them. Child bites you, you bite them back so that they understand, like, hey, that hurt, right? And again, whether or not you agree with it is not really the point. The point here is that in the study, it lumped together physical spanking with biting. And the problem that I had with it was like, well, if you're biting for regular punishment, then I would think that's a bit weird, to say the least. Like, if you told me, "Hey, my child bit me on the neck and I bit them back," okay, I've heard that before. It's not really out of the ordinary. But if you were to come to me and you're like, "Yeah, my child drew on the wall, so I bit them," I'm gonna be like, "The hell is wrong with you? You bit your child for drawing on the wall?" Like, it's not gonna make any sense, right? And so it seemed kind of odd that they would include that in there. The other thing that was in there is that they had explicitly looked at children that were spanked repeatedly in the same time. So this is the bend them over your knee and spank them on the butt like 6 or 7 or 8 times or however many times that parents do. And so then in that same paper, the researchers were like, we don't know if we get the same effect from a single swat on the butt. And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that's a huge difference." And how many parents maybe have only, like myself, have only given a single swat on the butt on rare occasions? Like, is that gonna be the same as being repeatedly spanked? Right? Like, and so I'm not really sure that people understand the studies. I think they just go and they look at the summary and they go, "Aha." And then they try to dunk on everybody, and they're like, "Well, this study says." So stop using studies, because chances are you probably haven't even read it. And I read these things because I'm like that. I wanna know this. I'm like, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I can read fast. I'll go read through it, and I'll check it out." And then I'll find some things that I'm like, I don't know." And then I talk to people, and then it's clear to me that they haven't read it. I'm like, "Oh, so you didn't even read it. So you don't know if the study is any good or not. You don't know if you agree with how they define terms. You don't know if you agree with how they constructed their data sets. So why are you using the study? You shouldn't. So stop. Stop using. And by the way, I mean, let's be honest. When was the last time that somebody was like, this study proves that spanking is bad for your kids? And then somebody who was pro spanking says, wow, a study said that? I better stop spanking. Never. It doesn't happen. So you're wasting your time. The studies not aren't it's not that a study is bad. Studies are useful to give us more information. Um, but what you should do is you should be able to talk about that information in a way that's not like, hey, you should appeal to this authority, which is really weird because like the people that oppose spanking, a lot of times they'll say things like, well, you're just teaching kids to obey authority. So imagine if somebody comes along and they oppose spanking because it teaches kids to, just fall in line with authority. And their argument is you should fall in line with this authority because all you're doing is teaching your kids to fall in line with authority. Like it's kind of not entirely contradictory, but the way that it plays out does come across as contradictory. So stop it. Studies are done. No more. You can read them, you can talk about them, but if you're just gonna wave and say, "Study here, do this," I'm just gonna laugh at you, knowing that you probably haven't even read it. Another one, this one drives me bonkers, is the clever sayings that don't always make sense. I mean, they might sound like they make sense to you, but they really don't. So, like, I've heard this one: "Would you hit your spouse if they didn't do what you told them to?" I'm like, "Well, no." But my spouse is also not likely to throw their personal belongings at me, kick stuff, or scream at me because I said, "Nah, maybe you shouldn't have that ice cream." We're comparing apples and oranges here. My spouse is 40 years old and has had 40 years to learn how to interact with people. My child is 4, you know? He breaks down crying when the dog chews up his thing, and, and it's the biggest deal in the world. He's not the same. So, stop making the comparison. Doesn't make sense, Now that doesn't mean that you should smack around your kid. That just means it's a bad argument. Like, no, I wouldn't do these things to my spouse. But my spouse doesn't do any of the things that my child does. Like my child one time, my son, I'm gonna tell on him. He'll watch this one day and be like, "Dad, for real?" No, it's not that bad. But one time he asked me something. He was like, "Can I have this?" And I said, "No, you have to wait until later," or something like that. And he got upset and he went and he drew and he come back and he written dad and mom on a paper. And he literally X'd out dad. And he was like, "Daddy, I X'd you out because I'm mad at you." Okay. And I just said, "Well, fair enough." I said, "We'll see how you feel later, son." That's all I said, you know? And my wife would never do that. My wife would never be like, "You know what? I hate you." Because we're grown adults. We know how to engage and deal with disputes in a reasonable way, you know? So, no, comparing my child to my spouse is absurd. Stop doing it. Another one that I don't like, people will say, if your child can reason, then use reason. If they can't, then they cannot understand spanking. And I think this is absurd because reason requires like abstract thinking. So, again, I think this is an apples and orange comparison. Now, I'm not saying it's okay to spank. We're just addressing bad arguments at this point. Okay. So here's how this works. If my child draws on the wall and I rush over and I go, "Johnny, no," and I smack his hand, okay, that hurts. And he doesn't have to understand a whole lot, really. He understands I was doing this at this time and I got smacked. Now he won't understand necessarily why. He doesn't understand that that walls are not to be drawn on. He doesn't understand that it might make our house look ugly, and that we'll have to paint it. He doesn't understand any of that stuff, but he might understand. Hey, for whatever crazy reason that I can't understand, this was a bad idea. So he might not do it again. So the idea that your child can't understand, they cannot associate physical punishment with an action, I don't think is legit. But again, there is a truth there that they won't understand everything, right? They're not going to understand all the reasons why. They don't understand, they just understand that whatever I just did, I shouldn't do. And so I'm not going to do it. So there is some degree of you are teaching them to respect authority under threat of physical violence. Like when people make that argument, that is true, right? And so you cannot at the same time say, well, if your child doesn't have reasoning skills, they don't understand spanking, and then turn around and say, well, spanking is just you demanding that they'll be obedient to authority under threat of violence. Because then you're saying that they understand the threat of violence. So either they understand it or they don't. So you have to pick one. As for me, I look at it and I say, no, he doesn't understand the fullness of spanking or getting his hand smacked or something like that. Um, but he or she might understand that, hey, whatever I just did, grown up didn't like. Now, for me, I look at it and say, that's not really like I want my child to better understand things. So again, I'm going to approach it differently for all the reasons that I talked about earlier. But again, we're just dealing with a bad argument. It's not a good argument, and any person that's pro spanking is going to see right through it. So stop using it. Probably the worst thing that people do, and this is the one I'm going to harp on the most, and this is the one where people may get mad at me. Stop calling it abuse. And I've had a lot of interaction with people that are like, "Oh, spanking a child is abuse." I'm like, "Oh, is that so?" Well, here's something interesting. A lot of the people that have told me that are the same people that will simultaneously tell you that your experience is not better than somebody else's experience. So you can't say, well, the way I experienced life is the way, and your experience is wrong. Like a lot of them will say something along that line, right? They'll have this kind of attitude that like everybody's experience matters. Good. My experience matters. I grew up and I got spanked. The running joke was once a day, sometimes twice, just to be sure. Like that was a running joke because I was an absolute hellion. Like you guys have no idea. You think I'm a nice and composed and chill now, but I was way wild when I was young. And so I got spanked frequently. And when my mama died in 2016, it just it really did something to me because we were super super close. I don't know that like we couldn't be any closer, with the mother-son relationship couldn't have gotten any closer. And so it just killed me almost. I don't know, probably really shouldn't say it that way, but it really took a toll on me. But again, we're talking about the same person that literally spanked me repeatedly a lot when I was growing up. So I look at it and I say, I don't feel like my experience was one of abuse. And so when you run around and you tell people, well, if you spank a child, we're talking about just regular spanking. We're not talking about, you blast your child, you punch them in the face. We're not talking about that. We're talking about regular spanking, things that happen all the time. Okay. And if you're going to tell people that it's abuse, then what you're telling people is that their fond memories of their parents are not fond memories. You're trying to override how I view my experience. And you're coming between the good memories I have of my mom and me. And let me tell you, I've lost friends over this. Like I've gotten into it very seriously with people because I'm like, are you willing to tell me that my experience was abusive? Because I don't believe that. And they would, and it's funny because the one person that I'm thinking of was unwilling to go that far, but kept wanting to say it's abuse and was getting very angry. And I was like, you need to back up. And we ended up parting ways over this because in no way will I allow somebody to come between me and the fond memories I have of my mom, even though those memories did include spanking. Because at the end of the day, I had a generally positive experience with my mom. And you are not going to tell me that it was something else, especially when I can compare it to millions and millions of other people. So this is not a situation where like I had this really out of the ordinary experience and I'm just kind of in my head mentally deciding that it was a good thing when in reality most of society would think otherwise. No, most of society would agree with me or a good portion of it. Maybe not most, but a good portion of it. The other problem with calling it abuse is that it's my mother was abused in a way growing up that virtually nobody would argue. So I can tell you a story. True story. I've told this before. Her dad was a drunk. He would come home drunk. He would go upstairs, pull her out of bed by her hair, throw her down the stairs, and stomp on her head. So when people say, "Whoa, spanking is abuse," when my mom spanked me for, say, lying to her, when I actually lied to her, or maybe doing something at school that I wasn't supposed to be doing, you know, when she spanked me for that, you're telling me by calling that abuse that it is equivalent to my mother being pulled out of bed by her hair and thrown down the stairs and being stomped on. That's what you're saying. So you're escalating my experience and you're devaluating my mother's experience. And I think that's wholly inappropriate. In fact, I will go as far as saying, and it's going to sound as odd, it's going to sound odd, when you run around calling regular spanking abuse, number one, I think you're being emotionally immature. Number two, As odd as it sounds, I think it's its own form of abuse because what you're trying to do is you're trying to say something very radically. You're trying to use very strong terms to force somebody to stop doing what they're doing. It's not really that much different than spanking somebody to demand that they stop doing what they're doing. You're just not using physical violence, but you are using it verbally because you're using this word on purpose because it has a strong connotation. Nobody, nobody would go around and say, "Yeah, I abuse my kids," because we all know that it's a horrible thing. And it should remain understood as a horrible thing. Society should never get to the point where we say where somebody could go out in public and say, "I abuse my kids," and someone else go, "Yeah, it happens." We should never get there. So using these terms, it's not much different than people that use other radical language to quickly try to invoke a certain negative feeling. So, like when people say, "Oh, you're a Nazi," what are they doing? They're trying to use a strong term that is generally considered negative to force you into compliance, right? They want you to stop doing whatever it is you're doing or stop saying whatever it is you're saying. Same thing with racist, same thing with sexist. They're invoking strong negative feelings to force you to change. Well, it's the same with abuse. That's what you're doing. It's kind of like a lazy shortcut to actually using that reasoning that you keep talking about. So if you talk about reasoning with children and to use reason, then perhaps you should do that with adults. Because if you don't, then similar to D.L. Moody, who will judge a man whether he's Christian, not by his pastor's words, but by his wife's words, the person that knows him the closest, right? In a similar vein, I'm going to judge you and say, like, look, if you can't use reason with adults, I don't want to hear about how great you think you are using reason with children because children are much more wild. They're much more unpredictable. So there's no way that and maybe you can, maybe you're just a jerk to adults and it's possible, but I'm not going to believe you. And neither are many other people. So it doesn't matter whether it's true. It's just a matter of how are people going to respond to it. So let me tell you one last story um, before we close the show out. So this is my first experience with a so-called peaceful parent. Um, so once upon a time, somebody had put out a study and said, "Hey, here's a study. It proves that spanking your kids is really bad. Blah blah blah. This is how they grow up. Yada yada yada." And I've argued the point. I said, "Look, without telling you my personal experience, I've argued and said, without telling you that I was spanked, if you just engage with me on a regular, everyday basis, and I didn't tell you about my upbringing, you would not be able to tell the difference between me and, say, my sister or my brother, who each got spanked one time in their entire lives. I got like one a day. They got like one ever, literally, because they were like total goody two shoes. And so you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between either of us. You would not be able to tell the difference between me and some other kid in some other household who grew up and never got a spanking themselves. You would not be able to tell the difference just by your regular everyday interaction with me. So I disagreed on that point, but then I went and I read the study and then I kind of picked it apart and I said, okay, well, here's some problems with that study. So so that happened, and then scroll forward a few like few arguments later or whatever, and somebody's pushing, I think, that same study. And so I had, since I had read it, I was like, oh, I've read this study actually, and I said, here are some of the issues with that. And this person who is a peaceful parent just kind of lit into me. I was like, whoa, like I didn't even say spanking was a good thing. And anyway, I was just like, look, I think there's some problems with this study. And I said, I think you need to not use this study. And they lit into me. And then they took it to a DM and they started messaging me and they were like, F you, you're a horrible parent, you're a this and that. And I mean, it was that they were cussing me out. And I was like, wow. Like, it was like, this was my first experience. Now, I don't think that all peaceful parents are like this. I think most of them are actually rational, okay? But this one person, they went bananas on me, and I was like, "Okay, I don't believe that you are a peaceful parent, I don't even believe that you're a peaceful person because you sound like a psycho. And I laughed at him because I was like, wow, like I don't, do you see yourself here? Like, do you do you even like, do you even realize how you're sounding right now? And it was crazy. Now that was the extreme version. Okay. Most of my experiences are usually with some of these, calling things abuse, um, and the clever, their little clever sayings that, like if your spouse would do it, would you respond this way? Like that's usually my experience. And I don't think those are any better. But I think all of these things that I'm pointing out are not helpful. They don't communicate why or how a parent can do better. And I think that every parent can always do better. Every single parent. I don't care if you're the greatest peaceful parent in the world, you have a flaw somewhere that you can work on. Everybody can be better, right? And so if we want people to be better, if we want to move, if you care about children, that you don't know, and you would like children to not be spanked, right? Even if you believe it's abuse, you need to learn how to communicate it to adults. And I'm going to tell you, running around calling people abusers is not it. Like it might, like everything works or is good for at least somebody. There's like 8 billion people on the planet. Somewhere there's somebody that if you call them an abuser, they're going to take it to heart and they're going to stop doing it somewhere. But for most people, if you want to have the biggest impact in the world around you, you need to learn how to communicate, which means if you're telling me about using logic and reason with your kids and finding creative ways to raise them so that they're emotionally, physically, and mentally healthy and they're good mannered and they don't get into too much trouble, right? They should get into some trouble, but if they don't get into too much trouble, if you're telling me this is the path, then it is the same path you should be using on adults. And you should recognize what is going to work and what is not going to work. So calling people abusers, demanding, you see a video online and somebody's spanking their kids and you're like, we should take their children away from them. Okay? Well, like for starters, all you're going to do is get the wagons circling. All the parents who believe in spanking are going to circle around and be like, yeah, we don't want our kids to turn out to be, whatever they think their kid might turn out to be. And they're going to surround them and they're going to basically protect them unless it's actual real abuse. Right. And since you're in the minority, because most people believe that spanking is acceptable, like for general reasons, most people believe that. That makes you, the person who opposes spanking, in the minority. That means you have the harder job because you have to communicate. You have to work with people to get them out of their mindset and say, here is a better way to do this. Here is a way that you can raise your kids and you can be confident that they're going to turn into good functioning adults. Because at the end of the day, most parents want their child to grow up and be healthy, meaningful adults, adults that do meaningful things in the world, that are nice, that don't harm other people, that don't steal things, right? Most people want that. And if they think spanking will lead to getting that, they will do it. So the goal for those who oppose spanking is to figure out, how do I communicate so that this person has an aha moment? Oh, aha, I get it. That's what you should be thinking of. That's why you need to change your communication. The same is I had to level set. I had to level set with my own son so that I didn't get angry when I didn't need to be, right? And I continue to level set. I continue to look for opportunities where I don't need to be angry. Like, why did he do this? Why did he come home and all of a sudden he doesn't like strawberries anymore? Right? Like out of nowhere. All these little annoying things that you're not always in the mood for. I have to continually adjust my expectations so that I can continue to be the best communicator and the best parent possible to him. And if it is your goal to get other parents to stop spanking, You need to continually adjust your expectations and your communication so that you can communicate the best way possible to other adults so that they will have their aha moment and you will be successful. Otherwise, all you're doing is talking so that you can hear yourself. And I'll say it again, when you get into that mode, you're useless. I've said it about other things. When it becomes about you are useless and you are of no help. And I don't really give a damn how bad you think it's abuse. If the best you can do is to say things in a way that's going to turn others off so that they won't listen to you, they won't reconsider their position, then guess what? You are an indirect enabler. It's true. That's what you are. All right, let's get some comments, some final comments here. And let's see. What do we got here? Let's see here. You spanked this argument, TL. You guys are killing me. You're really killing me. You spanked this argument. Well, I hope so. I hope it was effective. I really do. You guys are crazy. Let's see. Let's see. I think having let me put this up here. So Michael Parsons says, I think oops, I don't have it up on the screen. There we go. I think dang it, I got the wrong one, didn't I? That's the wrong one. I meant to do. So let's go. Where is it here? There it is. All right. I'm learning how to do this because I have to like look at different screens here. All right. So I think having a close relationship with your kids goes a long ways. Showing them your disappointment is worse than spanking. It can. It actually can. I agree. I knew a guy when I was growing up, and this actually had a big impact on me. His experience had a big impact on me. He said, when I was young, he said that they would have family TV night. And he said when he got in trouble, he was not allowed to sit on the couch next to dad. He had to sit on the floor. And that was his punishment. And he said, man, that just tore at me. He goes, that was worse than spanking for me. And now you could argue whether or not that should be done, but that, like sometimes, yes, if you're trying to get a message across to your child, expressing disappointment or, like a little bit of a separation there, that can be worse than spanking. It's kind of like taking their toys away or something like that, like the spanking. Okay. They go through it, their butt sore or whatever, you know, and, they're annoyed with you or mad at you because, they didn't want to get hit, but they at least have their toys. They at least can go back to doing these other things, right? That they were already doing. So they have that refuge. But if you take something away, well, they lose that. Right. So I think it can actually be more effective. So yes, totally agree. All right. This is a good one here, and I will end on this comment here. So it says, "My mom spanked." It gets all weird. My mom spanked, but I always knew she loved me. Absolutely, and I think that's where you're going to have a big problem with people when you try to suggest that their growing up years was abusive, because a lot of people will be like, "No, I am extremely confident that my mom and my dad loved me." So to tell me that they were abusing me, that doesn't make any sense. So you're simply not going to reach people because you will be talking in contradiction to their personal experience and how they viewed it. And so it's inappropriate. All right, folks. I thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer, you can go to my Rumble channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can go to rumble.libertydad.com. And you can also go to locals. That's going to be a little bit different. libertydad.locals.com. So make sure you write that down. It's a little bit reverse order there. So libertydad.locals, that's where you can go to join up and support me and then be part of the show behind the scenes. Otherwise, just feel free to go and subscribe and like at my YouTube and my Rumble channels. While you are there, leave me a comment. Let me know how I am doing. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. Well, have a great weekend. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.